They forced a black mother to change. Her baby in the luggage area. Next month. She became the new head of FAA. Clara Chambers never imagined her life would change in a single day. Yet here she was, cradling her tiny daughter in one hand and clutching a boarding pass in the other, as the roar of jets echoed through Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. What should have been a routine flight to Washington, d'Orsay turned into a defining moment, one that would test Clara's resilience and spotlight a hidden cruelty in modern travel. Forced to change her crying infant on cold, hard metal in the luggage area, Clara didn't realize that this indignity was only the first act in a story of triumph reckoning and stunning karmic payback. Clara Chambers was running late. She hated being late, especially because her baby Naomi had finally settled into a gentle sleep in the crook of her arm. It was 5 a.m, and Clara navigated the early crowds at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, gingerly weaving past strollers and bleary-eyed travelers. She was heading to Washington, D.C., with big dreams in her mind and a flicker of hope in her heart. The past year had been a whirlwind of challenges, from her unexpected pregnancy to financial hurdles. Yet Clara had clung to one unwavering goal. She wanted to push forward her career in aviation policy, something she'd dreamed of since childhood. Her late mother had often taken her to the local airfield. Sitting in folding chairs, they would watch small Cessna planes take off into the sky. Clara's mother believed her daughter could do anything she set her mind to. Clara carried that confidence like an invisible cloak, an armor she wore daily in a world that sometimes questioned her competence, especially as a black woman in predominantly white professional spaces. But Clara was no stranger to achievements. A graduate of the Georgia Institute of Technology, with a background in aerospace engineering, she had spent 6 years working with NASA contractors, focusing on safety protocols for launching satellites. During that time, she had built a reputation for meticulous detail and innovative thinking qualities that made her stand out at every job. Ironically, Clara's name was whispered in certain corridors of the Federal Aviation Administration, though she had no idea to what extent. She just knew she had a knack for pinpointing flaws in large bureaucratic systems and implementing safer, more streamlined solutions. Balancing a new baby with a new career leap was no small feat, though. As Clara entered the TSA line, Naomi stirred awake, letting out soft whimpers. Clara's heart fluttered, her breath catching a bit. She sang softly to her daughter, a gentle lullaby passed down from her grandmother. Already she could feel judgmental stares from other passengers, displeased at a wailing infant. At such an early hour, Clara tried to focus on her mission. She had an interview scheduled with a private firm in D.C. that did contract work for the Department of Transportation, a step she hoped might eventually open doors in the FAA. Little did she know fate would toss her life into upheaval at 30,000 feet. Once past security, Clara glanced at the giant flight schedule displays. Her flight was on time. She had only 10 minutes until boarding, so she rushed toward gate B28, adjusting Naomi's baby carrier. The overhead speakers announced her flight for boarding a fictional airline, Green Wave Air, that prided itself on friendly service and top-notch hospitality. Clara had chosen it for the convenient timing, not knowing it would become the stage for the day's unfolding drama. Her seat was near the back of the plane. Not ideal, but she wasn't in a position to be choosy about flight seats, given her tight budget. Clara politely asked a flight attendant, whose name tag read Holly for assistance, in stowing her small carry-on. Holly cast a quick glance at Naomi, frowning as though the baby was an inconvenience. Clara felt her stomach twist. She was used to subtle microaggressions, but this look was more blatant than usual. However, Clara forced a smile and found a way to wedge her bag into the overhead compartment on her own. As Clara settled into her seat, she hoped to feed Naomi during takeoff to ease the baby's ear pressure. But as boarding continued and the plane filled, Clara noticed that Holly kept throwing sharp, disapproving glances her way. Clara tried to shrug it off. Perhaps it was just stress or a bad day for the flight attendant. Yet Clara couldn't shake the unsettling feeling creeping up her spine. Before takeoff, Clara gently nursed Naomi under a shawl, aware of the plane's humming engines. This was a tricky procedure in cramped economy class, and Clara had done her best to secure a window seat for some privacy. A middle-aged couple next to her exchanged uncomfortable glances, but Clara ignored them. She wondered if they realized that infant ears pop painfully during ascent, if not soothed, regardless. Clara resolved to keep her dignity. If her child's comfort made others uneasy, that was their issue, not hers. Soon the plane was barreling down the runway, engines roaring to full power. Clara braced for the intangible moment where wheels lift from asphalt, that surreal flicker of weightlessness. She felt Naomi squirm against her chest, letting out a small cry. "It'll be okay," she whispered gently. Outside the Atlanta skyline, vanished beneath them. 45 minutes into the flight, Clara noticed Naomi's diaper was wet. She needed a quick change. Most airplanes have cramped lavatories, but Clara had done it before. She'd simply put down the changing pad on the tiny pull-down table inside the lavatory. She pressed the attendant call button, thinking it polite to inform them of her need. Especially with a child, Holly arrived, eyebrows already knit in irritation. "Yes?" she asked curtly, arms folded over her chest. "Excuse me, I need to change my daughter's diaper," Clara said calmly. "Could you show me the best lavatory to do that?" Holly rolled her eyes. "We don't have a special table for that. The lavatories are small, you know. Maybe you could wait until we land." Clara blinked. "I'm sorry. My baby is wet. I can't wait over an hour more. I've changed her in airplane lavatories before. It's tight, but doable." Holly let out a quick sigh and looked around as if searching for backup. Another flight attendant named Mike approached. He looked uncertain. Holly whispered something in his ear. Mike nodded, but he was clearly uncomfortable with the situation, as though he recognized Clara had a right to change her baby. Holly turned back to Clara. "The lavatory is in use right now. We'll see if there's a free seat somewhere else, or if there's another space you could do that." With that, she disappeared up the aisle. Clara felt confusion twist through her. She'd never encountered flight attendants who seemed this unhelpful. Yes, airplane bathrooms were awkward, but parents had no choice. She waited a few minutes, but no one returned. Meanwhile, Naomi began to fuss. More crying and turning red. Clara's stress soared. Another passenger across the aisle, a younger white woman with 2 kids of her own, offered Clara a sympathetic glance, but she seemed reluctant to get involved. Finally, Clara decided to just do it herself. She stood, pressed the button again, and flagged down Mike. "Please, I just need to change her diaper in the bathroom," she said. "I'll be quick, Mike." Looked like he wanted to be helpful, but had been given instructions. "Holly told me it's out of order," he said quietly. Something about a leak in the sink. Clara glanced toward the back of the plane. She watched an older man enter the very same lavatory without issue. There was no out-of-order sign. This was beyond humiliating. She began to sense something darker was this about her race. Her baby. The low hum of the airplane engine filled the cabin, a rhythmic vibration that usually lulled passengers into a quiet trance. But for Clara Chambers, that steady drone was drowned out by the rising cries of her daughter, Naomi. The baby's soft coos had quickly turned into discomforted whimpers, signaling the all-too-familiar alert, a wet diaper. Clara glanced around, hoping the flight attendants were still circulating. With Naomi now squirming in her lap, her face turning red from distress, Clara pressed the overhead call button. A soft chime echoed, and a moment later, the blonde flight attendant, Holly according to her name tag, approached with a blank expression. "Yes?" Holly asked flatly, not even attempting a smile. "Hi," Clara said politely. "My daughter needs a diaper change. Could you please direct me to the lavatory with a changing table?" Holly's mouth twitched in annoyance. "We don't have a designated baby changing area on this aircraft. The lavatories are very tight. Maybe you can wait until we land." Clara blinked, surprised at the brusque response. "I understand space is limited, but I've changed her in airplane lavatories. Before I'll be quick. I have my own pad and supplies." Holly crossed her arms. "The lavatory's not suitable right now. Maintenance flagged a leak in the rear sink. You'll have to wait." Just as Holly finished speaking, Clara watched as an older male passenger exited that very same lavatory. No sign of any leak, no maintenance tape, no out of order label. The door swung gently behind him. Clara looked back at Holly, puzzled. "But someone just came out of there." Holly didn't blink. "We've been advised it's not safe for use at the moment." Before Clara could respond, another flight attendant approached a younger man named Mike. He offered a small, uncertain smile, clearly uncomfortable. Clara seized the moment as she said to Mike, "I need to change my baby. Can I use that lavatory?" Mike looked at. Holly hesitated, then lowered his voice. "It's under review. Maybe we can find another option." At that moment, Naomi's cry escalated to a full-blown wail, her face crumpling in discomfort. Passengers began to shift in their seats, some glancing back with mild annoyance, others with sympathetic looks. The tension around Clara's row thickened. "I really can't wait," Clara said firmly, bouncing Naomi gently in her arms. "She's clearly uncomfortable. I have the supplies. I just need a space." Holly leaned in slightly, lowering her voice, though the edge remained. "If you insist on changing her now, the only available place is in the galley. There's a flat metal surface back there. We'll supervise you to make sure it's done safely." Clara's heart dropped. "You mean near the luggage storage, where you put extra bags?" "Yes," Holly replied matter-of-factly. "It's the safest space right now." Clara was stunned. "That's not sanitary. That's where you stow carry-ons that don't fit overhead. You can either use that," Holly said with finality, "or wait." A silence fell between them, one that stretched taut and cold. Clara could feel eyes on her, watching, judging, waiting for her to either lash out or comply. She looked down at Naomi, still crying, her tiny hands balled into fists, and made her decision. With trembling hands, she gathered her diaper bag and walked toward the rear of the aircraft. As she stepped into the galley, Mike hovered nearby, clearly uneasy, while Holly stood at a distance, arms folded like a warden watching over a prisoner. Clara knelt on the floor and spread out her portable changing pad across the cold metallic surface, flat, sterile, and utterly dehumanizing. She laid Naomi down gently, whispering comfort as she worked quickly, wiping, powdering, and securing a clean diaper. Her hands moved efficiently, but her heart pounded in her ears. The embarrassment burned through her chest. She felt completely exposed, not just physically kneeling in the galley where anyone could walk by, but emotionally as a mother, stripped of her dignity. The noise of the aircraft seemed to fade. All she could focus on was the injustice of the moment, the knowledge that if she were someone else, someone white, someone wealthier, someone seated in first class, this wouldn't be happening. Mike offered a paper towel when she finished. Clara nodded her thanks, avoiding his eyes. She cradled Naomi in her arms again, rocking her until the baby calmed, then stood her knees stiff and returned to her seat in silence. Passengers who had watched from afar now looked away awkwardly. No one said a word. The mother across the aisle, the one with 2 children of her own, offered a glance full of sympathy, but still no one stood up for her. No one questioned the absurdity of forcing a mother to change her baby beside bags and carts like she was cargo. Back in her seat, Clara leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes, tears finally slipping free. She had never felt so small, so dehumanized. The shame, the rage, the heartbreak, every emotion tangled together in her chest. All she had wanted was to care for her child. All she had asked for was basic dignity. What she got was a lesson in how the world still treated black mothers. But Clara didn't know then that this moment, this humiliation would spark a fire that no one would see coming, and that one day soon the skies would answer to her. For the remainder of the flight, Clara sat still, as stone tears quietly slipping down her cheeks. Naomi dozed off, lulled by the plane's vibrations and the warm comfort of Clara's arms. Clara's mind raced. Why had they done that to her? She tried to recall if she had missed a rule or misread some sign, but Clara knew the policies well. She had flown numerous times before. While many airlines didn't have ideal accommodations for changing babies, never had. She experienced an outright refusal to let her use the lavatory. She felt singled out. She felt powerless. When the plane finally touched down at Ronald Reagan, Washington National Airport, Clara waited until most passengers deplaned. She didn't want to jostle Naomi, and she didn't want the stares. As she stepped off, Mike mustered an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that," he whispered. "I really am." Clara offered no reply. She held her head high, though inside her stomach churned with a mixture of shame and anger. She had half a mind to complain to a supervisor, to demand names to file an official complaint. But the day had worn her down. She feared if she got into a fight, she might miss the interview that she'd flown here for in the first place. Stepping into the airport's main concourse, Clara found a quiet corner. She carefully balanced Naomi in one arm and tapped out a message on her phone to an old friend, someone who worked tangentially with an aviation consumer rights group. She described the incident in shaky detail. She had no idea if anything would come of it, but she wanted it off her chest. Then she drew a shaky breath and hailed a rideshare to take her into D.C. She had a job interview to attend after all. The building on K Street was sleek, modern, with towering glass windows. Clara stepped through its rotating doors, trying to mentally shake off the flight ordeal. She was here to interview at AeroVision Strategies, a firm that consulted on aviation policies. Clara believed she could bring her background in aerospace engineering and her passion for safety improvements to the table. She had arranged for Naomi to stay in an on-site daycare that AeroVision provided for employees and visitors, an accommodating perk. After signing in at the front desk, Clara kissed Naomi goodbye. "Mommy loves you," she whispered, feeling her heart tug as a gentle daycare worker led her baby away. With that, Clara squared her shoulders and stepped into the interview suite. She was greeted by a small panel: Clara Chang, the HR manager, Victor Mullins, the head of the aviation policy division, and another man introduced as Andrew Garfield, not the actor Clara noted wryly, but a middle-aged consultant with a background in the Department of Transportation. The conversation that followed was stimulating. They asked Clara about her NASA contractor days, her interest in fostering new safety protocols, and her vision for bridging engineering with policymaking. She spoke of the pressing need for more inclusive policies for traveling parents. She even lightly alluded to her own experiences, but didn't mention that morning's humiliating incident. Victor Mullins leaned forward, clearly impressed. "You have a strong background, Miss Chambers. The FAA has taken an interest in your ideas regarding advanced flight safety checklists. You mentioned you wrote a white paper on the subject." Clara nodded. "I did. It proposed the integration of AI-driven sensors in older plane models, specifically to catch mechanical failures early. It also touched upon passenger well-being considerations that go beyond the standard. For instance, updates to onboard facilities to accommodate the reality of traveling families." Andrew Garfield brightened at this. "Actually, I recall reading about that. It's been passed around the Department of Transportation. There was talk that the current secretary might push for some modernizations if the FAA administrator changes their policy approach." Clara blinked. The mention of the Secretary of Transportation was thrilling. She also knew that the FAA's acting administrator was soon stepping down. Rumors were swirling about who would replace him. She had never imagined that her name was circulating in those halls. She was simply passionate about making air travel safer and more humane. The interview ended on a high note, with Sarah Chang giving Clara a warm handshake. "We'll be in touch soon," she said. "We're seriously considering you for the position." Clara left the building, feeling a renewed spark. Maybe something good would come of this day after all. Yet the morning's degradation still weighed on her. She resolved to file a complaint against Greenwave Air as soon as possible. Enough was enough. A day later, Clara sat in her cramped hotel room in D.C., typing a careful, detailed message to the Department of Transportation's Aviation Consumer Protection Division. She outlined how she was forced to change her daughter in the luggage area after being denied use of the lavatory. She named Holly and included flight details. She emphasized that she believed discrimination played a role. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she decided to also post a concise summary of her experience on a well-known social media platform, describing only the facts. No accusations, no inflammatory language, just what happened and how it made her feel. She didn't expect much. Social media is fickle. Sometimes stories vanish into the void. Other times they explode. Clara clicked post, set her phone aside, and tried to relax with Naomi, who was fussing. By the next morning, Clara's phone was pinging non-stop. Friends, acquaintances, even strangers were sharing her account. Comments poured in, some outraged, some disbelieving, and others supportive. And then a surprising thing happened. Reporters started calling. Within 48 hours, Clara found herself standing outside the Department of Transportation building, giving a brief statement to a local news outlet. She explained that while she hadn't initially wanted media attention, she felt compelled to speak up on behalf of parents, especially mothers of color who face discomfort and discrimination. While traveling, the story was too powerful to ignore, and Clara's composed demeanor, holding Naomi, who cooed at the cameras, struck a chord with the public. A wave of pressure fell on Greenwave. Air social media campaigns demanded accountability. A few national news networks picked up Clara's story. Even the caretaker from the flight, Mike, reached out to Clara privately to apologize again and confirm that, indeed, Holly's behavior was unwarranted and discriminatory. But Clara's biggest surprise came when her phone buzzed with a call from none other than an administrative assistant to the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. The Secretary's office wanted to meet with her to discuss passenger rights, particularly in the realm of parental care and racial equity in air travel. Clara was stunned. She agreed to meet, uncertain of what might come of it, but determined to speak her truth. The meeting at the Department of Transportation felt surreal. Clara, dressed in a navy blue blouse and slacks, carried a professional demeanor that belied her nerves. She sat in a waiting area, Naomi in a lightweight stroller. She recalled reading that the FAA administrator role was in flux. Steve Dixon had stepped down some time ago, and Billy Nolan was serving as the acting administrator. Rumors of a new nominee had floated around, but nothing concrete. When Clara was called in, she expected a quick handshake and a polite, perfunctory conversation. Instead, she was ushered into a conference room where several staffers and policy advisors sat. They invited her to sit, offered coffee, and introduced themselves. The secretary himself, known for his hands-on approach, walked in moments later, greeting Clara warmly. "Ms. Chambers," he said, "I've read your white papers on aviation safety, and of course I'm aware of the unfortunate incident you faced on Greenwave Air. I'm sorry you had to experience that. This administration is committed to passenger equity and safety, and we're currently exploring new leadership at the FAA." Clara nodded, her heart pounding. She expressed gratitude for the meeting. She explained her vision for improved airline policies that respected the dignity of all passengers, including mothers traveling with infants. She spoke of her own experiences in engineering and the specific changes she believed were overdue. She outlined a bold but detailed plan for rethinking safety checks, passenger accommodations, and the culture of accountability among flight crews. The staffers listened intently, exchanging impressed glances. Clara noticed them jotting notes. Her voice trembled slightly, but her passion shone through. Naomi surprisingly remained content, wide-eyed and curious about the new surroundings. After nearly an hour, the secretary tapped his pen on the table. "Ms. Chambers, let me cut to the chase. We have reason to believe your expertise and your personal drive could be transformative for the FAA. There's an administrative process to follow. Of course, the President ultimately nominates and the Senate confirms. But if we were to open the door, would you consider stepping into a significant leadership role at the FAA?" Clara's mind reeled. She had never considered the possibility of heading the FAA maybe in 10 or 15 years once she'd climbed the ranks. But here was an opportunity practically at her feet, born of her unique blend of policy acumen and lived experience. She hesitated. "That's an incredible opportunity." She managed, feeling tears gather in her eyes. "I'd be honored, but also that's a massive responsibility." Smiles spread around the room. The secretary nodded. "We'll go through the formal process, but I wanted to gauge your interest directly. Consider this, the beginning of a very important conversation. Over the next 2 weeks, Clara's life became a blur of phone calls, confidential briefings, and legal advice. A special vetting process was initiated standard for high-level government appointments. Clara confided in her father about the possibility of being nominated as the new FAA administrator. He was both thrilled and concerned about the intense public scrutiny she would face. At the same time, Clara's story about the airplane incident continued to garner media attention. Reporters asked if Clara's new relationship with the Department of Transportation was influenced by her viral post. Clara tried to clarify that she had been an aviation professional for years and was not simply catapulted to fame by a single unfortunate event. Still, critics on social media sneered that Clara's experience was being exploited or that she was using it to climb a political ladder. Clara did her best to tune out the negativity, focusing on her internal moral compass. She wanted to bring real change to air travel. Meanwhile, Greenwave Air scrambled to contain the damage. They issued a statement apologizing for the isolated incident and announced that the flight attendant, Holly, had been placed under review. They tried to contact Clara with a settlement offer, urging her to drop any formal complaints. Clara refused to be silenced. She demanded broader reforms, mandated training for flight attendants on anti-discrimination and passenger care. She insisted that airlines install universal changing tables in at least some lavatories, especially on long-haul flights. While Clara had no illusions that all airlines would immediately comply, she hoped her situation could at least start the conversation. A quiet storm was brewing behind closed doors. Clara's nomination for FAA leadership was moving faster than she could have ever expected. With a strong endorsement from the Secretary of Transportation and interest among certain key senators, Clara found herself on the cusp of a monumental shift in her life. Less than a month after her humiliating experience on the plane, Clara stood at a podium in front of a small throng of reporters in Washington, D.C. She had been invited to a press conference where the Secretary of Transportation formally introduced her as the President's nominee to become the next administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration. Cameras, flashed microphones, jostled for position, and Clara saw her reflection in the glare of the lights, Naomi perched calmly in a stroller, just a few steps behind. She delivered prepared remarks. She thanked her mentors, her family, and spoke of a future where air travel would be both innovative and compassionate. She referenced the need for more inclusive policies for parents, for ensuring no one was ever forced to do what she had to do, and for elevating the safety standards of aging aircraft. But no sooner had Clara finished her speech than the questions began flying more. "Chambers, do you feel qualified to lead such a major agency so quickly? Is it true you gained notoriety from a viral complaint against Greenwave Air? Some critics argue you're being pushed forward only because of a diversity agenda. How do you respond?" Clara's stomach churned, but she answered calmly. She cited her engineering background, her policy experience, and her proven record of drafting comprehensive proposals already lauded by aviation experts. She concluded with a poised statement. "I'm here because I've dedicated my career to the science of aviation safety, not because of a single incident. However, that experience has galvanized my commitment to ensuring we treat every passenger with dignity and fairness." Within hours, major news outlets broadcast Clara's nomination. Social media erupted again, this time with both fervent support and fierce criticism. Some corners of the internet labeled Clara a token candidate or unqualified. Others hailed her as a trailblazer, a black woman, a single mother breaking down the gates of an industry long dominated by men. Clara felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The Senate confirmation process for an FAA administrator can be grueling. Clara found herself in a series of closed-door meetings with senators, briefing them on everything from runway safety to commercial drone integration. She studied nights, preparing for tough questions. She knew some might try to discredit her, focusing on her motherhood or her so-called activist background. She braced herself. When the confirmation hearing finally arrived, Clara stepped into the chamber, wearing a tailored suit and carrying a stack of papers. The room buzzed with onlookers, journalists, supporters, critics. Naomi was safely at a daycare center in D.C., so Clara could focus on the task at hand. One senator known for his conservative views grilled Clara on her qualifications. "Ms. Chambers, you've made headlines because of an unfortunate event. But in terms of controlling an agency that oversees thousands of flights daily, we need more than a personal anecdote. Tell me why you're truly ready for this job." Clara took a steadying breath. "Senator, I've been involved in aviation safety for nearly a decade, working on NASA-adjacent projects and writing policy proposals for the Department of Transportation. My experience isn't limited to my personal incident. It's grounded in engineering and proven problem-solving. I've already laid out a detailed plan for modernizing the FAA's technology frameworks and improving oversight. Another senator, this one supportive, spoke up, "Sat, Miss Chambers, can you elaborate on your plan for implementing better facilities on aircraft for parents with infants? That's been a major public interest topic." "Yes," Clara said. "My goal is to introduce new guidelines that encourage or even require airlines to provide safe designated areas for infant care, at least on longer flights. The FAA can partner with manufacturers to retrofit or redesign lavatories, ensuring that basic human needs are met without humiliating passengers." The hearing lasted hours. At the end, Clara emerged exhausted but proud that she had stood her ground. Over the next few days, senators deliberated, analysts speculated, and Clara tried to manage her own swirling emotions. She waited, biting her nails when no one was looking, hoping that her nomination wouldn't fall prey to partisan politics or baseless attacks. Finally, a vote was scheduled. Clara waited outside the Senate chamber. Her phone buzzed with well-wishers. Then the news broke. She had been confirmed as the new administrator of the FAA. Clara's knees nearly buckled. She sank into a chair, tears welling up in her eyes. Everything had changed in just a month. She had gone from a humiliated mother in an airplane's luggage area to the official head of a major federal agency. Naomi would grow up watching her mother shape the future of air travel. Shortly after her confirmation, Clara needed to fly back to Atlanta to move her belongings and finalize family matters before officially starting her role in D.C. She booked a flight on Green Wave Air purposefully. Word had spread within the airline that the woman they'd humiliated was now the FAA chief. When Clara arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson, the gate agents recognized her immediately. She tried to remain incognito, but the hush that fell when she approached the desk was palpable. She was greeted with utmost courtesy. An agent even upgraded her to first class on the spot. Clara politely declined the upgrade. "Thank you," she said, "but I'd prefer to experience your normal service." That's how we learn, right? The agent's face went pale, and Clara could see genuine nerves behind his smile. Once on board, Clara settled into her economy seat. Naomi, a bit older, now wriggled in her arms. The flight attendants recognized Clara. She saw fear in their eyes, as if they expected retribution. But Clara had no intention of lashing out. Instead, she observed how they interacted with other passengers, particularly parents. She noted if they offered assistance or guidance. She wanted to see if any changes had been implemented. Since her complaint mid-flight, Clara needed to change Naomi once again. She stood and headed toward the lavatory. Instantly, a flight attendant rushed to assist Miss Chambers. "Let me help you," she said, voice trembling with deference. She opened the lavatory door, showing Clara the newly installed fold-down changing table inside. Clara felt a surge of relief. Greenwave Air had acted swiftly to add this facility. She nodded, appreciative that they took her suggestions seriously. When Clara finished, she returned to her seat, feeling a sense of closure. She would never forget the humiliation of that first flight, but now she had the power to ensure no one else endured it. That was karmic payback enough. Still, the swirl of emotions ran deep. Knowing that Holly, who had forced Clara to the luggage area, was nowhere to be seen. Clara had heard rumors that Holly was placed on leave and faced possible termination. Clara took no pleasure in that, but she couldn't deny feeling a measure of vindication. In her early days as FAA administrator, Clara rolled out a series of pilot programs to improve passenger experiences. She convened meetings with major airlines, including Greenwave Air, demanding that they adopt updated safety and comfort measures. She worked closely with the Department of Transportation to craft new guidelines addressing everything from runway inspections to crew training in racial and cultural sensitivity. Clara even spearheaded an initiative called SkyCare, which provided grants for airlines willing to redesign planes for better accessibility and parental accommodations. The pushback came swiftly from airlines resistant to spending money on retrofits. Some called Clara's reforms unrealistic mandates. But Clara stood firm-armed with data that showed how small design changes could drastically improve passenger health and safety. Moreover, she had the White House's backing, not to mention public sympathy from her viral story. While it wasn't a smooth road, lawsuits loomed, lobbyists complained, Clara refused to be deterred. Amid these external battles, Clara dealt with her own internal challenges. She had to learn the ropes of administering a colossal agency with thousands of employees and complex regulatory frameworks. She navigated office politics, forging alliances with experienced staffers and fending off those who underestimated her due to her relative youth. Late nights became the norm, and Naomi's presence in Clara's office was not unusual. Clara often joked, "My daughter's first steps might be in the FAA headquarters," yet she thrived on the work, fueled by the hope that one day no parent, no person would ever feel the sting of discrimination in the skies. One sunny afternoon, Clara received a surprising email. The leadership at Greenwave Air requested a private meeting. They wanted to discuss a newly proposed partnership with the FAA to pilot advanced infant care facilities on flights. Clara's first thought was cautious. Was this just PR for them? But she recognized the potential good it could do for passengers. When she arrived at Greenwave Air's headquarters, Clara was greeted by a small delegation of their executives. They all wore practiced smiles, exuding contrition and eagerness to impress. In a conference room lined with aviation posters, Clara sat at the head of the table, representatives from her staff at her side. Greenwave Air's CEO spoke first, apologizing personally for the incident Clara had endured. He admitted that the company had lagged behind in its approach to family accommodations and diversity training. He then laid out a plan to revolutionize their fleet, promising spacious lavatories, fold-down changing tables, and mandatory training for all flight attendants. He requested the FAA's guidance and offered Clara's team full transparency in the rollout. Clara listened intently, occasionally trading glances with her staff. "It's a strong start," she said measuredly. "But this can't be limited to a single airline. We need industry-wide commitment." She then explained how the FAA was considering new regulations that would require such improvements across all major carriers in the US. They discussed budgets, timelines, and compliance expectations. Finally, the CIO asked if Clara had any additional requests. Clara paused, thinking back to Holly's hateful glare and her own helplessness on that flight. "Yes," she said, voice steady. "I need assurance that no passenger, whether they're a parent, a person of color, or someone with disabilities, will ever face demeaning treatment from your employees." The CEO nodded fervently. "We understand." After the meeting, Clara felt a strange combination of relief and sorrow. She recalled how everything had started. It was a potent reminder of why she was here. In just a short span, Clara had gone from powerless passenger to a powerful decision-maker. News of Clara's appointment and her swift reforms sent ripples through the aviation community. Some airline employees who harbored discriminatory attitudes learned the hard way that the industry was changing, Holly, the flight attendant who had humiliated Clara, faced an internal investigation. Her record showed previous complaints of rude behavior toward minority passengers, and ultimately she was terminated. It was a stark reminder that prejudice had no safe haven in an industry now closely watched by Clara Chambers. In a twist of fate, as Clara's profile rose, a wave of public support overshadowed the initial negativity. She was invited to speak at universities, women's conferences, and engineering summits. People were captivated by her story, how a single mother overcame an incident of blatant disrespect and transformed it into a platform for widespread change. Clara's father, beaming with pride, attended her talks whenever he could, always sitting in the front row with Naomi in his lap. For Clara, real karma was not about vengeance, but about reformation. Airlines that once resisted change found themselves compelled to adapt or risk public backlash and tighter regulatory scrutiny. And for passengers, especially mothers of color, Clara's story lit a path of hope that they too could fly without fear of humiliation. Just when Clara thought she'd found her stride, a crisis struck. A near-miss incident occurred at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, involving 2 commercial jets. Media headlines blared, "FAA under fire after scare." At major airport, critics targeted Clara, questioning if her focus on passenger comforts distracted from core safety measures. Clara's phone blew up with urgent calls. She convened an emergency press conference, explaining that the FAA had already launched a full investigation. "Safety is our top priority," she declared, voice resolute. "We will leave no stone unturned in understanding how this near miss occurred and in preventing future incidents." Behind the scenes, Clara worked around the clock, coordinating with air traffic controllers, airline executives, and safety inspectors. She discovered that outdated radar systems and staff shortages at O'Hare contributed to the incident. Determined to secure funding, she personally lobbied Congress for emergency upgrades to the airport's infrastructure. The pressure was immense, but Clara steeled herself, leveraging every ounce of her expertise and leadership. In the end, the crisis stabilized. A robust plan to upgrade Chicago's air traffic systems was set in motion, and Clara's reputation as a decisive leader was bolstered rather than diminished. With the crisis behind her, Clara's dedication to both safety and passenger dignity gained broad acknowledgement. She spearheaded a new FAA initiative known as Project Horizon, aiming to modernize aging air traffic control technology across the country and mandate humane on-board facilities. The synergy of safety and compassion became her hallmark. Meanwhile, Clara finally found a home in D.C., a modest townhouse not far from FAA headquarters. Her daily routine involved early mornings with Naomi, navigating the demands of single motherhood and high-level leadership. Some nights, she woke to feed Naomi, then spent hours drafting policy recommendations. It was exhausting, but Clara felt alive. Greenwave Air, once the villain of her story, had also embarked on its own transformation, launching a PR campaign highlighting its new family-first approach. Ironically, they plastered Clara's quotes about airline responsibility across their marketing materials. Clara received complaints from some corners that they were using her words out of context, but she had to concede that if it pushed the industry forward, it might be a net positive. Months into her tenure, Clara was invited to the White House for an official ceremony celebrating advancements in aviation safety. Dressed in a formal Navy suit, Clara approached the podium in the East Room. The president praised her leadership, her commitment to public service, and her personal resilience. Looking out at the assembled guests, senators, industry, CEOs, reporters, Clara couldn't help but remember the cold metal surface of that luggage area. She took a shaky breath and began her speech. When we talk about aviation, we often focus on technology and regulations. But at its core, aviation is about people. Every passenger who steps onto a plane deserves dignity, safety, and respect. That's not an optional add-on. It is foundational. And I learned this truth the hard way on a day that changed my life forever. She glanced down at Naomi, who was in her father's arms. Clara thought of the countless mothers, fathers, and children who would benefit from a system that no longer turned a blind eye to their needs. Tears glistened at the edges of her eyes, but she continued. Later that evening, Clara mingled with guests at a small reception. She spotted Andrew Garfield, the policy consultant, not the actor across the room. He smiled warmly and made his way toward her, Administrator Chambers. He said with a grin, "It's been a whirlwind. Congratulations on everything, thank you," Clara replied. "Sometimes I still can't believe all this happened." He nodded. "You might want to believe it, because rumor has it the Department of Transportation is eyeing you for even bigger things down the line." Clara laughed, thinking he was joking, but his serious look told her otherwise. "Bigger than the FAA," she teased. "Let me catch my breath first." He chuckled softly. "Fair enough, but Clara, you've opened eyes and ears in Washington. People admire your tenacity and the balanced approach. You bring technical expertise with genuine empathy. That's rare. Don't be surprised if you're tapped for a cabinet-level position someday." Clara's eyes widened, her heart pounding at the mere suggestion. She glanced at Naomi again, the baby who had unknowingly propelled her mother's journey from humiliating adversity to unimaginable triumph. The future felt wide open, brimming with possibility. Eventually, the night winded down. Clara slipped away from the White House, her father at her side, Naomi cooing happily. The city lights cast a golden glow on the Washington Monument in the distance. Clara felt the swirl of ambition, gratitude, and disbelief. As they drove back to their D.C., Townhouse Clara quietly vowed to remain grounded, remembering that her power came from serving others, not from titles or fame. She gazed at Naomi sleeping in her car seat and felt a fresh wave of purpose. If Clara had gone from kneeling in a plane's luggage area to addressing the nation's aviation concerns at the highest level, what else was possible? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: Clara Chambers, the once anonymous passenger who had been forced to change her baby on a metal shelf, had reshaped the landscape of American aviation. And in the process, she had claimed her rightful seat in history. Proof that sometimes the most humiliating moments can spark a revolution. Thank you for staying until the end of this remarkable journey. Clara Chambers' story stands as a powerful reminder that moments of injustice can pave the way for monumental change, from facing blatant discrimination in the aisles of an airplane to becoming one of the nation's top aviation regulators. Clara's perseverance and expertise lit a path for all those who dream of creating a fairer, safer world, whether in the skies or beyond. If this story inspired you, please show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to this channel. Every click helps spread Clara's message of resilience and equality, reminding us all that no matter how harsh the circumstances, hope and determination can guide us to new heights. Let's keep this conversation going, and together push for the kind of future Clara Chambers fought for, one where dignity and humanity take flight for everyone